Firstly, thank you for the talk. It was really interesting. So first of all, like it seems like AI is like a very interdisciplinary subject. Clearly, you mentioned a lot of like psychologists and like even like what I've read is like algorithms, like genetic algorithms and everything have been derived from like biology and everything. But it seems like AI has been a core to CS classes only, even in like universities. So like, how much of the like, do you think like only a computer scientist who has only a CS background will actually excel in a subject like AI? And if not, then how much of an interdisciplinariness do you think it's required? Like taking one or two, like taking psych classes is good enough, or like actually double majoring in psych and CS, or like similar field will be a better idea?
That's a good question. I think AI is a huge field. In fact, sometimes one subfield of AI and the kinds of words they use, the vocabulary they use, the kinds of techniques they use, and another subfield of AI, they have nothing in common except the high level umbrella philosophy. I remember going to IIIIs and IJKIs where there will be 8 parallel tracks, and I may be interested in 2 or 3 of them, and when I go to a different track, I will have no idea what is going on. So, yes, there is a psychology side to AI, but you do not have to study psychology in order to do AI. You can actually do AI starting from where you are, as long as you have some of the core elements of the field, and the core elements of field that come from computer science and also come from statistics and probability, right. And so, as long as you have those 2 backgrounds in detail, in depth, then I think you can start out. Moreover, if you have some other background, like suppose you had linguistics background, then you would be a perfect person to do natural language processing, because there AI gets applied to text and various languages. On the other hand, if you had background in healthcare, then you can work on healthcare applications for AI. So, basically what we need is, if you are innovating on the core technology, then the basics are in computer science as well as in math. And if you are working on applications, then some of these ideas come together in context of a certain application. So, yes, the field is extremely interdisciplinary, but the field is interdisciplinary more because it has applications to that some other field, or because at some point they borrowed some elements from another field. For example, Markov decision processes, I said, right, that is a formalism that we use in reinforcement learning, but it actually came from the operations research community way back in the 60s. But now MDPs has been part of AI and we have incorporated it. So, you need not have operations research way of looking at MDPs, you can learn MDPs right away in the AI school, in the AI classes. Now, another point that you mentioned is that AI classes are core only for computer science, and I think that is a challenge, and I think AI needs to be taught to broader audience. I in IIT Delhi, for example, often find students outside computer science and teach them as much as I am able to, given the popularity of the class. And that is not only true for AI, I would say this should also be done for machine learning and maybe some of the other techniques that are developed. So, more people get to know about it and they can start using it in their particular fields.
Yeah. So like question was, so IIT Delhi is like extremely known for its BTech program, like one of the best institutes in the world, and a lot more in India as well. But regarding masters and PhD, it's seen like at least from I'm an undergrad student, but even passing out, like finishing BTech, you think of like going abroad for masters and PhD and not thinking so much about doing it back in IIT or like even in Indian institutes. So like that is a challenge I'm quite sure like the university feels as. So what like are the possible solutions that in your opinion are like practical enough to be implemented, and why is this even psychology even there in the first place?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. That's a question that has been very important for pretty much all IITs and all researchers in India, or most researchers in India in computer science at least. I think if you think about it, we need a very strong, well-oiled ecosystem to do research. There is so much that is going on all around you, and when you work on research, you are trying to innovate to a point where you develop something that nobody in the world knows about, and that is very hard to do for a beginning student. So, therefore, you need to do it in conjunction with an advisor. And if you look at the, maybe let us just go back 20 years, I am told that the whole computer science department would have funding for one person to travel to some top conference and present their work. So, we have started in a time where the journals would take 6 months to come to IIT, and the journal papers would have been submitted 1.5 years earlier than that, and then they finally get published. And so, we get to know about information about research maybe 2 years after the research has already been done. So, by the time we start thinking about how to innovate on top of it, those researchers have already gotten a head start and they are much ahead of us. So, two things happened. Some of the best minds who used to do really exciting research in their PhD, when they moved back to India, they did not find the same amount of resources and information to be able to make significant inroads, and slowly their research started to fail or reduce in significance and impact. Some of us did succeed. Some of the best successes that came out of India happened in theory, because in computer science, because theory does not require lots of resources, and moreover you can work on 30-year-old problems and you can actually make impact. And this is what happened with, for example, Manindra Agarwal's prime sys P, the famous theorem, which was a 30-year-old problem, and he sort of cracked it sitting at IIT Kanpur with his undergrad students, or with his students in IIT. So, but that kind of research, it is very hard to do a lot of it. It is very hard to crack 30-year-old problems all the time. More often than not, you do research because you get to know of a very interesting idea and you start to develop it. Like suppose neural networks just happened, you want to suddenly start using it and have. So, suppose when I start to use neural networks, now it is a very computation intensive model, right. So, for that I need to buy resources, and for that I need to find funding, and this is not only true for me, it is also true for people in academia in the US and in England and elsewhere. But the speed at which I was able to find funding here was much less than the speed at which they are able to find funding and find resources and move, right. So, it is a fast, there is a fast movers advantage that happens. So, therefore, it becomes somewhat difficult to be a sort of the top leader, thought leader of a field sitting in India, because a lot of innovation is happening in the US. Things have changed to a drastic level now, where we have lots of funding for travel. We also have information that comes out very quickly, like on archives, people even publish relatively less complete works, and so we get to know what is happening in the world very quickly. So, now some of those challenges have gone away. Now, it's the onus is on the younger faculty to make use of this opportunity and start doing high quality research, and things are changing. Again, as I said, if you go back 10 years, there were very few researchers which were publishing at the top level. Now, we have 30 of those. I am sure 5 years down the line we will have 60 or something like that, and things will improve. Students will only come once you have excellent faculty members who are publishing at the right level and who are doing impactful work. Students will stay later, because it is not in their best interest to work with us in a system which is not the highest quality, except if they have some other constraints. So, sometimes we get really awesome students, but those students have some secondary constraint to stay in India, therefore, they come to us, and that is our privilege that we are able to advise them and therefore, do really good work through them, but that is not the solution. The solution will only happen when slowly this thing evolves and we are in a much better place with respect to our research, and this is going to happen. The question is in how much time.
So, my first question is that when we talk about AI, so when it is actually beating the humans in chess, so we know that a checkmate means the machine has won. But in case of open-ended questions in finance or economics, as we are looking for AI to solve, so and especially when we don't know what it is actually doing to give the output, how reliable or safer it is in when it would be actually affecting the masses.
Okay. So, the question about safety is an interesting question, and it is also a challenging question already. For example, suppose the machine says, why don't you do such and such procedure on the particular patient. If it does not have a strong safety model, if it can make mistakes, then that is going to be catastrophic, and we do not want AI systems to be catastrophic in making their choices and failing suddenly, right. And that is exactly what happened in the context of the self-driving car that Tesla had, where Elon Musk had with respect to Tesla. So, this person was raving about this car saving him, a week earlier, and then suddenly this car could not identify a huge white truck, and this person died. And these kinds of mistakes are going to happen early on when the AI has not reached the real performance. Once it reaches the right performance, then the AI system will be much more accepted. But in the intermediate times, there is going to be some kind of back and forth where people will question whether the AI systems are good for the society at large or not. So, to answer your question, I think safety is an interesting and difficult topic. People are thinking about it. The bigger challenge is, how do we know that something is safe? Well, we can put in constraints. We can add constraints and figure out that and make sure that the machine is not going beyond that constraints. But to specify all possible constraints so that it stays within the realms of safety is actually by itself a hard question. And so I would say that research is still on in making sure that the AI system stays safe while delivering the value they have to deliver.
Okay. So the next question that I want to ask is, like, as while pursuing a career as a researcher or a scientist, when we actually don't want to just stick towards our books or something like that, how hobbies can play a role in actually developing our thought process as a researcher?
Interesting. So, it is not usual that somebody asks about hobbies in a technical talk, but I think that is a really good question. It is my firm belief that every productive person should have a balance of three things. One is they should have some intellectual activity that they are part of, and in our world, in the computer science world, AI or whatever research that we are doing which is technical already has intellectual implications. We are constantly using our brain to solve a problem. So, that is easy for us, but some people may or may not be doing it. The second thing we should be doing is we should always be doing some physical activity that keeps our body healthy, that keeps our mind fresh, that gives us a way to take time off our day-to-day activity and sort of give us energy and keep us fit. And I think the third very important thing is that we should be engaged in some kind of aesthetic activity. Maybe mere painting, maybe maybe music, maybe dance, maybe theater, anything that sort of develops our a refined sense of beauty and aesthetics. And I feel that once we are, now I want to mention that it is very hard to find balance in all three of these. For example, I have seen exactly two people in my life which I would say are excellent at something in all three of these. Excellent at playing something, excellent at performing something or doing something artistic, and excellent at something intellectual. I have found 3 or 2 such people. So, it is a very hard balance to find, but it is I think a balance that we all need to work towards, because if our mind is fit, if our body is fit, if our mind is fresh, then we can do more, we can do better intellectual research. We can start to see beauty in our research. Every once in a while you see these people who would jump off and say, yeah, I have solved this problem, and get really excited, or see a proof and they say, this is the proof that God must have written, and therefore it should be part of the book. I hope you know I am talking about Paul Erdős. So, once we start seeing beauty in science, when we start connecting all these, then we become passionate about what we are doing, and that sort of makes us a wholesome person. I do not know whether that directly affects our research, but I do feel that indirectly it gives us a sense of balance. I have seen this in my life once in a while, where I am really tired, I do not want to do more work, but I have to do work, but I had 2 hours where I have to play music first, and after playing music I feel like I have more energy to do work. So, sometimes some of the other activities gives us energy back to do something else where it may be draining. So, this balance really makes this wonderful, and I do not know if a hobby directly affects research, but I think a balance in these 3 makes us a wholesome person, and I bet it will affect research indirectly as well.
My first question being, like your PowerPoint slide said that you can use AI in a lot of fields, like AI for education, AI for medical, health, etc. I was wondering, why wasn't there any AI for environment as such? Because that's where we live. This is the earth where we live in, and I couldn't see any stress upon our environment. And
Yeah, not in my slides for sure, but yes, AI can be used for environment. Whenever there is a lot of data being generated, and from that data I can do predictions, AI can be used. So, for example, environmental predictions, I can use AI. Using these environmental predictions to maybe figure out interventions, maybe some simulations in the context of AI can help. So, definitely AI can help in environment to the best of. Oh, and it is being used. So, for example, there is a lot of work in a field called computational sustainability, where AI techniques have been used to figure out bird migration patterns, figuring out what kind of interventions do we need to do so that birds start coming into a certain space and so on. Birds is one example, but many different kinds of examples have been found in this context, and I would suggest you look at Cornell University, which has a very significant institute of computational sustainability, and they do a lot of research there, and lots of other people in the country do research in this area. But I am less aware of that work, so therefore I didn't bring it up in my talk.
all right, my second question being also not usual and seen in technical talks. How important would you think are scientific interpersonal skills, communication skills? Like mostly students are bound to a book and a desk and a chair in classroom, but how would you think, what do you think is the importance of that?
A researcher is his own marketing person. This is the sooner you realize this, the better it is. This is my firm belief. I have to give talks, I have to write papers, I have to discuss with colleagues, I have to sell my work. We are really all the time marketing our work when we do research. Why? Because we have written the paper, we can't just wait. The number of papers that are coming out in the world are so many, we can't just wait to hope that someone will pick it up and move beyond it. If we want to make a change in the world, if we want to make an impact to the world, and we are often doing research because we want that, it is our responsibility, if we have done something significant, if we believe we have done something salient, to popularize it, to tell others, to tell them its implications, to help them find collaborations. This is also true if you are not a researcher. If you are in a company, you still have to prove to your boss that you should be allowed to do what you want to do. You may have to give presentations in the company, you may have to work with your colleagues in the team, and you may have to communicate with them all the time. So, interpersonal communication, technical as well as giving talks, as well as writing papers, these are all extremely important in the life of a researcher. And therefore, I think that we all should be developing these skills, and there are many things, and your advisor would obviously guide you in what kinds of skills you are lacking and how to improve them. I can tell you honestly, when I wrote my first paper, I was terrible in writing papers, and my advisor almost completely changed the paper. It was my organization, I was very good in organizing information, but I was really bad at language and communicating it. Over time, I figured out how to say something which is in the right level of abstraction, at the right tone and pitch, and then over time I try to impart that to my students. So, it is a process, it takes time to learn, but I think it is extremely important.
So, what type of skill set as a student that I need to get into AI?
What type of skill set do you need to get into AI? Your excitement in AI and math and computer science. Basically, those are the skills you would need. So, I think when people do AI, they have to do a lot of linear algebra, at least in the modern world. They may have to do a lot of probability, they may have to do a little bit of logic, they may also have to do some data understanding, some data processing, and they may have to innovate and build those algorithms. So, you have to have strong computational background, strong programming background. So, I think those are the skills you need. I do not think the skill set is very unusual, but yes, there is one thing that sometimes bothers some people within AI. Sometimes our problems are very ill defined. We do not know exactly what does it mean to achieve AI. So, we have to somehow look at the domain of interest and think about what is the right formulation here, what is the right problem here, and that takes some time and some learning, and there is a little bit of uncertainty in there. And some people are more comfortable with well defined problems, and sometimes AI does not give them. But other than that, I do not think there are any skills which are very particular to the field of AI that that is the roadblock in somebody's entry into the field. I think it's just basic math and computational skills.
Sir, my next question is, can we call AI as a new species? Because we are just taming it. In past, we just tamed a horse and used it for transportation, and then we got into the mechanical car, and then we are now getting into the intelligent car, or I can say it as an intelligent mechanical horse. Basically, a new species that is invented or discovered in the nature by humans. So that is my question, like, can we call it as a new species?
Right. So the best analogy I give is that AI is the brain, okay, of any species, right? So if I am talking about self-driving cars, then the algorithm that figures out when to brake, when to move the steering, that is the AI. And it is operating inside an organism. Which organism? The car itself, right? So I would call intelligent car maybe as a new species, going by this analogy. I wouldn't call AI itself as a new species. AI is the brain that is powering all kinds of species. So you may have a chess player, that's a new species. You may have a Go player, that's a new species. You may have a Siri and Cortana, and they are species of their own. The AI is what is powering their behavior. So I wouldn't call AI as a species, it's just an organ inside many species.
So what are the technical advancements in hardware design by AI? Like, is AI contributing in hardware design also?
AI has always been contributing in hardware design. So even when we used to teach, early on, we would say that just VLSI design and figuring out where to place each particular transistor and diode and so on and so forth, that is often optimized by AI. So because AI can do optimization for you, and you have a circuit that you want to put together on a chip, how should you place it? Often people would use algorithms like simulated annealing, which are part of AI. So this is way back in 80s. But if you ask me specific questions with respect to how AI is helping hardware design in the modern world, I am not 100% sure. I do know that there is a lot of work going on in GPUs. As you can understand, deep learning needs high quality GPUs. So Google came up with what is called a TPU, which you can run a TensorFlow on, and TensorFlow runs much faster than on a GPU. And a lot of new hardwares are coming out, a lot of new processing units are coming out by companies like NVIDIA and so on, because they want to improve the performance of GPUs. But I am sure that there much more is going on with respect to the use of AI in hardware design, but I am not aware of all of that. It's not a domain I have thought too much about.
So this question pertains to general research, but I will like you to answer in the context of AI, in which it is more relevant. As you said that AI has become much more buzzword and hype because it is entering the lives of the people and getting to the user, each and every user. So my question is, as an early researcher in AI, a lot of people get into the dilemma that whether they should contribute towards the technical novelty of the field or the societal impact. And sometimes both the things don't go together. If you go towards the societal impact, as such, you may not give something very new technical, and you may lose early there. And or the other side, if you go towards the technical novelty, you just drive the theoretical things forward and you leave the societal impact, which is also not true. And it is, I think, very relevant in the context of living sciences as well, where we want that the science should enter to the society. As such, what do you think about this thing and how to resolve this dilemma for early researchers?
That's an excellent question, and I think so. First of all, I disagree with the point that technical innovation and societal impact don't go hand in hand. I have often seen that some of the best innovations happen in the context of an application. You can take object recognition, and the use of CNNs was all driven towards the object recognition data set. You can take AlphaGo, and the use of a specific way of doing reinforcement learning was all driven through the context of AlphaGo. So I think once you are very passionate about an application, then it back tells you, you can go back from it, and it tells you what kind of technical innovation is needed in order to solve it. At the same time, if you have been thinking about this in the context of algorithms and context of current state of the technical world, then you can see some holes. you can see that okay, this is not done, this is not done, and this is not done, and I can do any of these three. There I think you can think a little bit about what would be more useful to the world, what will have more applications, and then focus on that part of the technical question. And if you have been able to create something fundamental, then also there is some onus on you to show that this fundamental thing has so many applications. So I am personally very comfortable whether you go from applications to technical innovation or technical innovation to applications. I think the important thing is to make sure that you close the loop, so that you feel happy that you did something which is technically significant and has many applications, and you also showed value in a particular application or two. Now, your point is still valid though. As an early researcher, where do you start from? You didn't ask it like this, but this is the question one should be asking. Should I start from theory or should I start from application? And I think that answer is personal. I think it's a matter of who you are. So, research is your self-expression. How you think, what you think is important, how you solve a problem, all these things come together in your research output. So, if you are a kind of person who lives in the world of models and algorithms and and loves solving puzzles and keeps thinking about them all the time, you will have some theoretical puzzles going on in your mind, and that is what is pushing you. That's your passion. You should start from there. If on the other hand you are the kind of person who is thinking, how can I use this technology that I know my understanding in giving clean water to all the people, or in reducing poverty, or whatever is the question that you really stand for, then you start from there. At the end of the day, you can start from an application, go back and come up with the theoretical advancement, or start from a theoretical advancement, make sure that you improve the application. By only doing one and not doing the other, that is the problem. Make sure that you start from somewhere, but you finally try to close as much of the loop as you are able to.
So in your talk you mentioned about war robots. So what are the implications of using AI in war, and especially against nations like China, who already has the means of production and they can outproduce anybody?
So, I am not aware of where China is with respect to their war robotics. The question stands, question is valid, the question leads a little bit of a difficult picture, but I would point out that that it is all about policy when it comes to war. So, think about nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons have the ability to completely devastate the whole of the earth, and the only thing we can do as scientists is nothing. Nuclear weapons have been made. Now, what can policy makers do? They can keep them safe. So, that is the first thing that we have to realize, that when it comes to war, policy plays a much stronger role than technology, and often a lot of people say that technology by itself is value neutral, it is about how it gets used. Now, in the context of AI and war, lots of things are going to be possible in the future. How much, when and where, what gets used is a matter of policy, as I just said. So, for example, there may come a time where we do not want to send people to war, we want to sell robots. If we send robots to war, then there will be very few casualties, no casualties, but it may also decrease our threshold to go into war. So now that is a challenge, and how we deal with it is completely up to us, right. Another thing that could happen is that one could have targeted weapons. So, nuclear weapons will or any kind of bombs weapon the bullet may know who it is supposed to hit. Now, I am just sort of fantasizing here, but it is very much possible, right. And if we have that kind of technology in the bullet, it may be good for the mankind. We will only kill Osama bin Laden and not kill anybody else around, or whatever it is, right, that we are thinking about. So, what kind of a future we would have with war robotics is not very clear. I can tell you that a lot of AI researchers got together a couple of years back and signed a major letter requesting the government to not study war robotics and so on and so forth, but really governments will not study. That is not going to happen, because if some other government studies, then you are late in the game. So we do not know exactly how it is going to turn out. It can actually be much better because people are not getting killed. It can be much better because we are not killing lots of people at random. It could be much worse, that we may go for more wars because it's easier to go on wars now because we don't need to send people. So I don't know the clear future that it will have. It's a question that we are all thinking about in general.
Mozam, you have experience of working in US and India as a mentor. So one question comes to mind is, what difference do you see among the student population, especially I'm asking in reference to PhD students. So do you find any difference or?
I think students are students anywhere you go, but of course there are some statistical differences. So there will always be exceptions, there will always be people who are really good at something here or really good at something there or vice versa. But also the statistical property of a student population is dependent upon which university you are in. So if you rank all the universities into one large ranking, and various organizations do that, then I was lucky to be at University of Washington, which is sort of in the top 6 or 7 or maybe top 5, and now I am at IIT Delhi, which is at say top 50 in the best case currently. So that naturally creates a certain student population, right? And also because we are in India, only Indian students come here, right? So those two factors determine the difference in the student population. So for example, in US at University of Washington, the kind of students were so smart because they were the best from IITs, from Tsinghua University, from the top places all over the world, that their level of training was very strong, and they were often taught by really awesome teachers, and they had background on subjects I myself may not know about. And so when those kinds of things happen, then an idea can be converted into a technology or a working demonstration much more rapidly, because they can move much faster because of their training. And moreover, I have sometimes felt that at least the average American has more initiative than an average Indian. So for example, in India we are we emphasize rote learning, we emphasize solving a problem correctly, but we never question the problem. There is no innovative solution, there is always one answer kind of a thing. And in that kind of a setting, and it's typically resource constrained setting. So in that kind of a setting, the students are somewhat more linear, whereas a student in the US in general, they do many more presentations, they build many more projects, they do team things. So they are somewhat more dynamic at times than Indians. And so because of that, what ends up happening is that you start a conversation in a certain direction, the student may take it in a very different direction because of their sort of general awareness and dynamism. So I think those two things are somewhat missing here. So you find that the students that come here require a lot of training, because many times they are from the tier 2, tier 3 institutions within the country, and they have been taught from books and which sometimes may be older curriculum, and the teachers may not always be excellent, but they were diamonds in the rough, and so we judged them to be diamonds in the rough. So we took them on and we started working with them. So the first year, 2 years of productivity is rather low, because they are still trying to figure out the basics and taking the courses and trying to understand what's going on. That kind of delay may not happen in a top university like University of Washington, but it may also happen in, let's say, a equivalently ranked university in the US. Right. So there are smaller departments who may not always get the best of the students, and there you may find that you may require the same level of effort with the student to train them. Moreover, because these are Indians, their level of respect to you is very high, so you will often tell them something, they may often do that thing without necessarily, at least in the beginning, thinking about that maybe the advisor said something which doesn't make sense, right. So that level of respect and that level of I would say lack of questioning that is natural to our society, that sometimes gets translated into the PhD students. So I often ask my PhD students to call me by my first name. I tell them that we are peers in research, for the reason that literally when we do research, advisor is guiding for sure, but the advisor doesn't know the answer either. It's not a teacher who knows the answer and wants you to figure it out. A PhD is a situation where both the advisor and the advisee are trying to find the answer together, and so therefore they are more often than not peers. And so as soon as the advisee or the student starts to question the advisor, say that this doesn't make sense or believe that it doesn't make sense, do things on their own initiative, I start to feel much better for my student, because now I know that they are taking ownership of the problem and trying to run with it in the direction that they believe strongly in. So, I think those two differences are there. I would say that anything that I said here about lack of initiative is also true for some of the students there. Anything that I said here about maybe not the best students in terms of training is also true for some of the students in even a top university like University of Washington, but I think the proportions are different.
One of the students asked the importance of communicating skill. But seems like as an advisor, you also have to have management skill and personal skill and managing people and projects. So how and when one should think of acquiring these skills and what can help? Because this is a mandatory something. I mean, a set of skills that you ought to know it before
We all learn it on the job. I don't have an MBA degree. It would be nice if I did, but so I have a team of maybe 20 students right now, not all PhD of course, and so one has to manage them all the time, and there may be some interpersonal relationships issues that may happen sometimes between the advisor and the student, sometimes between two students working together on the same project. There may be time management skills that you need when you are working with so many different students and many different projects. Then you have to make sure that you portion as part of your time for teaching, a part of your time for each individual project, and no project gets left behind, and so on and so forth. So yes, a lot of management skills are needed, and this is, I would say, typically needed as you grow up the ladder in anything. For example, as a PhD student, my only job was to solve my problem and maybe take a course and do the assignment once in a while, but mostly solve my problem and whatever is the next step for that. I had all the time in the world to do that one thing. Right. As I grew mature, I started doing two problems in parallel. As I became a faculty member, I started with 2 students early on. Later, when I started becoming comfortable, I had 3, 4, 5 students. Now I have 7 students and so many undergrads and so many different things going on, in addition to a lot of my professional responsibilities. So I think we all learn on the job. This is also true for a beginning engineer who is just doing coding, to a team leader, to somebody who is thinking designing for the team, and so on and so forth. So this kind of role and shift often happens for all of us. I think the best we can do is to introspect a little bit and see if we are lacking in one particular direction, dimension, then we work on improving it, and also open communication. So whoever you work with, they have a model of you. There are certain things that they like about you, and then there are certain things that they don't like about you. To the extent you are able to have a slightly open conversation, it's hard to do it with students because it's a power relationship, but to the extent you can have an open communication channel, it sort of gives you feedback in what you need to improve. But I don't have a magic answer for how to improve management skills. I think it happens on the job, and some people are better at it, and some people are not always.
But so I agree, you can learn on the job, or as you go along. But is there something, if you have to go back in time and you can tell yourself not to do, professionally speaking?
I really can't think of one. I have had a fairly happy life so far. Professionally, I have made some choices. I still, if I had to make the same choices, I would make the same choices based on the information I had. I was deciding between a faculty job and a research career in research center, and I chose the faculty job. I'm very happy I chose that. There were several problems I worked on. There were some problems I failed on, and somebody else solved them. And this is sort of part of the game. I can't think of something off the top of my head. Maybe I should do more introspection.
So talking of choices, you were a faculty in US University and you decided to come back, and a lot of students want to know what is it that make people come back to India, and when there are several reasons not to come back,
So here there are two sides of the question. One is what was the reason I came back to India, and one is what are the reasons I would give now for coming back to India, having lived and experienced what does it mean to be an academician in India. So those are two different questions, because my knowledge of how Indian academia works was relatively limited at the time, and so the reason for me to come back to India was primarily personal. It was not really a professional decision. I was very happy professionally in the United States, but I think there are some very distinct advantages of being a researcher in a country like India. First is the amount of impact you can have. We are training so many more students, and every new PhD student who we graduate in US has some impact, but every new PhD student we will graduate in India will have much more impact because the community is much smaller. So, the kind of impact, the kind of say we can have in the policy making, for example, so many times I get calls from Government of India for participating in various meetings which will decide sometimes the future of the country on a certain topic. And that kind of impact I can never even imagine I would have in United States, where they are just the stalwarts and the masters of the craft all over, right. So, there is some advantage to being in a relatively small place and having a skill that is important. So, that is one advantage. Secondly, there are some very interesting advantages that happen because you are living in India and you have access to the problems that Indians face, which they may not necessarily have sitting in the United States. So, there are many problems for developing countries and many technological problems, impactful applications that you could work on and touch lives of millions of people if you succeed, which would be much harder to do sitting in the United States. So, there you are thinking about the first world problem sometimes, right. Why does my Siri not recognize the thing correctly and does not give me the right joke or whatever it is. But here you can actually do something where the farming population will benefit, and once the farming population will benefit, given the agrarian society we are, it could impact millions and millions of people. And so, that kind of impact, broader societal impact, is very satisfying for a researcher and would be much easier to gain in India.
Wow, with this positive note, we'll just end here. Thank you, Mausam, again. Thank you so much.